Hey everybody, I hope you're okay and welcome to our last video looking at Peter's relationship with Jesus. So let's have a recap of what we've done so far. So on our first video, we saw that Jesus was the trusted king, the king that we can trust. On our second video, we saw that Jesus was the real king. We've seen that Jesus was the servant king when he washed his disciples' feet. We've seen that he's the betrayed king when Peter denies him 3 times and says he never knew him. We've seen that Jesus is the rejected king when he dies alone on the cross. And amazingly, we've seen that Jesus is the risen king and that the tomb was empty and that he was alive. And today, we're going to see that Jesus is the forgiving king. So I've got a little heart here with the word sin crossed out because Jesus is our forgiving king. So let's go on to today's story. It's in the book of John, which is one of the Gospels. It's one of the stories of Jesus' life. And it's in chapter 21, verses 1 to 19. So I'm going to give you a quick moment to pause the video, read it as a family, and then we can come back together and have a chat more about it. So, in our story, the disciples were in a boat, a bit like our first story, but this time there wasn't a storm and they were fishing. But they hadn't been having much luck. In fact, they hadn't caught any fish at all. And they'd been out there all night. And just then, a stranger comes to the bank of the sea and he calls out to them and he says, "Friends, have you got any fish?" And the disciples say no. And I imagine they were a bit grumpy, having been out there all night. And then he says something a bit strange. And he says, "Take your nets out of the water." That's what they do. And he says, "Put them over the other side of your boat." That's a bit strange, isn't it? Because I imagine if we've not caught anything over here, we're probably not going to catch anything over here. But a bit later, the disciples pull the nets and they don't come in. And when they look in the net, they see the nets are so full of fish that they can't pull them in. How amazing is that? And just then, one of the disciples says to Peter, "That stranger who is on the riverbank is Jesus." And Peter is so excited that he runs and jumps out the boat and swims to the shore. And when he gets to the shore, Jesus is there. And Peter and Jesus and all the disciples have breakfast together. Now, after breakfast, Jesus turns and talks to Peter. Now, remember that this is one of the first times that Peter and Jesus have talked together since that Peter had lied about him and said he never knew him. And Jesus asks Peter a question. And he says to him, "Peter, do you love me more than these?" And Peter says, "Yes, Lord, I love you." And Jesus says, "Take care of my lambs." And then a second time, Peter is asked a question by Jesus. And Jesus says, "Peter, do you love me more than these?" And Peter says, "Yes, Lord, I love you." And Jesus says, "Well, feed my lambs." And then a third time, Peter's asked a question. And the third question is this: "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter's a bit hurt by this because he's been asked the same question 3 times. And Peter says, "Lord, you know everything. You know I love you." And Jesus says, "Feed my lambs." And they talk for a bit longer. And at the end of the conversation, Jesus says these words to Peter. He says, "Peter, follow me." You see, even though Peter has messed up, he's denied Jesus, he said he didn't know Jesus, he made lots of mistakes, he's failed Jesus. Jesus still wants to give Peter a second chance. Peter is still forgiven by Jesus. And in fact, Jesus says to Peter, "Be a shepherd. Feed my lambs," he says, doesn't he? He says, "Feed my people, look after my people." You see, Jesus completely forgives Peter for failing him, for lying and for denying him and saying he never knew him. And it's the same for us. Jesus will forgive us if we come to him and say sorry. You see, there's no mistake that you've made and nothing that you've done that is so horrible and so wrong that Jesus won't forgive us. That moment when you've been a bit grumpy with mum and dad, when you've not refused to clean your bedroom, when you've lied to get your younger or older brother in trouble, all those times, Jesus is still willing to forgive us because he is the forgiving King and he loves to forgive his people. That's why he died on the cross, so that he could forgive people, so that we could be his people, even when we do wrong. Isn't that amazing that we have a King who is forgiver, who will forgive us? It is an amazing, amazing thing. Well, we're going to move on now to our memory verse. And I think we've been doing it with James over the last few days. And it is this: I passed on the message as of first importance that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. And that is in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 and 4. So let me do the signs, join in if you can, and then we'll do it all together. So it is this: I passed on the message as of first importance that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures. We do Bible, we do Christian book, Bible. So according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised, and we do the symbol for life, on the third day, according to the scriptures. And that's in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 and 4. So let's do it all together. Are you ready? I passed on the message to you as of first importance that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures. We do Christian book. That he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. And that is in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 and 4. Well, that is sadly all I've got time for, but I'm sure I'll see you very, very soon.